Rick, we were talking before we came on. You had a bet that you were particularly keen on. So most of the markets, some of the awards markets are still viable to bet into, like MVP, which maybe we can get a take on, which seems to be getting more and more ridiculous. But a lot of the award markets are like starting to get kind of decided. A lot of the divisions are basically decided. You can bet title, or you can just wait like 2 weeks. These miss the playoff markets, though, have been really interesting. Obviously, in the West, you have Dallas and Oklahoma City and what's going to happen there. But in the Eastern Conference, and this is to make like the actual 8 that make the tournament, I know you were kind of thinking through some logic in terms of who you wanted to bet on.
Yeah, I like Toronto with how they've been playing lately. They've been getting a little bit better. They're still not great in the half court, but just with how big they are and the way they're able to handle the boards, I do like them to be able to get into the playoffs, especially if you're looking at if the 4 is going to be Miami, Toronto, Atlanta, Chicago. Miami's going to be your 7, and then I tend to think it's going to be Toronto's going to be your 8, so they would have 2 opportunities to get in, and they're plus 130 right now. Like, the market is telling you they still think Atlanta is more likely to get in than Toronto, and Chicago is least likely of the 4. And I just disagree. I think Toronto is playing better at the moment. Some of their wins have been against trash teams, but that's kind of what everybody's dealing with at this point. So I'm just thinking in these individual matchups, I like what Toronto has. And the fact that Scotty Barnes, after his, bad start to the year, has really started to play better. So you're not putting so much on Siakam having to put up nearly 30 every game, or, needing to trust OG Anunoby to hit every 3 that he's taking, which he loves to take. But and their defensive ability, they're still forcing the most turnovers in the league. And while obviously that's going to come down a little bit as well as the pace does in the playoffs, I just like the way they're playing, and I trust them more than Atlanta or Chicago. With them having the same record as Atlanta, I think they finished the year in those last couple games a little bit better, because they do have 2 games against Boston, but what's Boston really going to have to play for? Because the 1 seed is essentially wrapped up for Milwaukee. So at that point, Boston's the 2, they're set, and it could be, just running down the stretch of actually Boston, Milwaukee for Toronto, and you could have 3 games against bums.
Milwaukee did take a big step towards the number one seed in the Eastern Conference with their win over the Philadelphia 76ers. The Raptors wrapping up a spot in the play-in with a 20-point win against Charlotte. Siakam did have 30-plus points in that game, a ton of assists as well for Fred VanVleet. All right, so we talked miss playoff markets in the Eastern Conference there, Rick. You like the Toronto Raptors to get into the final field of 8 in the East. Anything in the West stand out to you as far as miss goes for the postseason?
I just think it's interesting with how much is still in flux. And I understand OKC is at the 10 and they're most likely to stay at that 10 spot. The fact that they're almost 8-1 to make the final 8 seems a little crazy to me. Like, it's just, I still don't know that I would bet them to get there, but the number just seems a little bit off. Like, all things considered, like I'm just happy that there, has been the news that, or at least the thought that's come out from Shams today about, maybe because the Mavs have this top 10 pick that is protected from the Knicks from the Porzingis trade, that maybe they should consider shutting down Luka and Kyrie, that essentially it looks like the 10 might be set in the West because Utah is going to do everything they can to not be there. So if OKC is essentially guaranteed that spot, I think there's a little bit built in of them falling out of the 10 altogether in that 8-1 number. So I think there is a little bit of value there, even though it would still be a tough road, but a 9-10 matchup against Minnesota, who's slumping. And then if it's, maybe the loser of a 2 LA teams matchup, or New Orleans, if New Orleans, who's been red hot, if they just don't shoot lights out anymore and it's OKC against them, that could still be interesting. And I think it's very reasonable that they could win those 2 games, at least at that high of a number. I put a little bit on OKC to make the playoffs at 8-1.
Rick, as the seeds keep kind of changing around with all of the Western Conference teams, like Denver's, because they won last night, Denver's almost certainly going to be the one. Otherwise, it was actually going to get a little tricky for them, and Jokic might have had to play. But looks like they're going to be the one, Memphis 2, and Sacramento. Okay, so it's it starts to get pretty dicey pretty fast. You're already kind of giving us a good idea of the bottom of the playoff markets. Because of all the seeds changing around, has it kind of changed your thoughts about who gets an easier path in some matchups and who you might want to bet on? It's been Denver and Phoenix at the top of the market forever, basically. And it's Phoenix 250, Denver 3-1. like, okay, that's going to hold no matter who plays who. But like the Lakers are changing their path a lot, and the Clippers are changing their path a lot, and like the Warriors might be changing their path, maybe for the worse. We'll see. With all of the kind of musical chairs here, has it updated your thoughts on like, I really like this team to win the Western Conference?
It's not the most unique thing in the world to just say, man, if you could tell me who's going to get that 6th seed. But I almost wonder if at this point, because of how much it's part of the mainstream, is it actually going to be adjusted too much to where whoever gets the 6th seed, whether it's, Golden State or either LA team, I could see that number being like significantly shorter than it would be if it was, let's say, New Orleans that ends up in that spot, which New Orleans is a little bit interesting because of the possibility of, does Zion come back at some point? They didn't play great in there. Like, they were 7-5 in 12 games with Ingram and Zion. And also, I'm sure he'd be on the minutes limit. And that's just so much of a variable. But if you tell me New Orleans is the 6th seed, and they at least have a possibility of it, and right now, or at least last I checked, they were 80-1 to win the West. That seems, if you want to take a flyer on something crazy, just saying, hey, this Western Conference is really weird. Maybe if they get the 6th, that's a path for them because it's Sacramento and then maybe Memphis. And then, you just have to hope that extra rest and not having to go through a gauntlet helps them out in a conference final against, let's say, Denver, Golden State, or Phoenix. 80-1 is kind of a crazy number, if nothing else, for any of these teams to be involved. But really, it's just, what's that 6th seed going to end up being, or who does that end up being? Because it seems like if there's going to be value, if it's not one of those, marquee teams, then maybe if it is Minnesota, if they can get anything right, or if it is New Orleans, maybe because of them not being a marquee name, they're able to get a little bit of value on that.
Hard to imagine Minnesota being able to win a playoff series if they lose to a Portland team that trotted out like the 3 of us in the starting lineup. The biggest point spread upset in 30 years. Ridiculous. Rick's talking about the 6th seed obviously would play Sacramento in the first round. A pretty advantageous matchup. Not that they would definitely win, but you'd rather face Sacramento than Phoenix, Memphis, or Denver if you're going to be the road team in a series. And teams 5 through 8 right now in the West, that's the Clippers, the Warriors, the Lakers, and the Pelicans in order, separated all by a half game. So a lot still to be figured out in terms of Western Conference playoff seeding. Rick, what about NBA most valuable player right now? Joel Embiid -210, Jokic +250, Giannis at 6-1 at our show sponsor BetMGM, and Giannis in the news big time as it concerns MVP with what Coach Bud had to say and Drew Holiday had to say after the Bucks beat the Sixers, and they're basically like, Giannis gets the LeBron treatment now, like he should just win every year, and he doesn't. What do you think about MVP? Anything to do there?
And I know he muddied the waters earlier, but I think what Kendrick Perkins said today is something that is indicative of some voters, just of, hey, it's so close, best player, best team. It's a narrative that's been brought up. And, for some of maybe your older voters out there, that's kind of what they do of, like I heard Howard Beck say that a while ago, and he's, a very well-respected national reporter, of just, there's going to be some of your electorate that is like, okay, I kind of understand these numbers and that they're all very close. So what if I just don't want to deal and I just say, who's the best team? Who's the best player on that team? And go with that. And that would lend some credence to Giannis. At this point, though, I'm not going to act like I know who's going to win it or that I have a super strong take anyway. Like, I have positions on Embiid and Giannis, and I honestly missed the boat on the best of Jokic numbers at this point. So maybe this isn't the worst time if I really wanted to totally hedge, but at that point, I'm pretty much just trying to break even wherever I'm at. So I just think that the best player, best team, while we try, dive into all the numbers and do everything we can, maybe some people just aren't going to do that. They're going to hear the synopsis of, here's all this, but they're all really close, and just be like, oh, okay, best player, best team, Giannis.